can be easy to take for granted the rights we have as women today. While we continue to fight for equal pay, abortion rights, and combat daily discrimination, we can forget the struggles and the victories of the women who came before us. Women like Betty Friedan. Betty Friedan was an American feminist, activist, and writer. Most famous for her 1963 book, The Feminine Mystique, Betty was credited with sparking the modern feminist movement. She played an integral role in shaping the lives of women today. My name is Alicia Parrish, and to further understand how Betty managed to make such an impact on the world, I will explore her background, her career as a writer and an activist, and analyze her use of rhetorical devices and her 1981 speech, her commencement speech at Smith College. Betty Friedan's early life gives context to her colorful career. Betty was born in Peoria, Illinois in 1921 to Harry and Miriam Goldstein. Harry and Miriam came from Jewish families in Russia and Hungary. Harry owned a jewelry store, and Miriam wrote for the society page of the newspaper. As a young girl, Friedan was active in Marxist and Jewish circles. Her childhood explained some of her later pursuits in life. She wrote, "Passions against injustice originated in the Jewish community, originating from my feelings of injustice towards anti-Semitism." Friedan attended Peoria High School, where she became involved in the school's newspaper. Her application to write a column was turned down, so her and 6 of her friends created their own literary magazine called Tide, which discussed life outside of school. She continued on to college in 1938 at an all-female school, Smith College. Friedan won a scholarship within her first year for outstanding academic performance. She soon became interested in poetry and had many poems published within Smith Publications. She became an editor-in-chief at the college newspaper in 1941. Subsequently, the editorials became more political and took on an anti-war stance, which caused much debate within the college. Next, she attended the University of California, Berkeley for 1 year on fellowship with Erik Erikson for graduated work in psychology. Here she became more politically active and continued to associate with Marxists. After her studies, Betty Friedan continued to lead an impressive writing career. After leaving Berkeley, Friedan became a journalist for leftist and labor union publications. When Friedan became pregnant with her second child in 1952, she was dismissed from the union newspaper UE News and became a freelance writer. She wrote for various magazines, and she even wrote for the Cosmopolitan. Friedan is most famous for her book, The Feminine Mystique. The Feminine Mystique started at Friedan's 15th college reunion, where she conducted a survey of college graduates, asking them about their experiences and their satisfaction in life as a college graduate. After this, Friedan began publishing articles about the problem that has no name, is what she called it at the time. These articles received enthusiastic responses from housewives who had been suffering alone up until now. After receiving so much interest in the topic, Friedan decided to expand on it by writing a book, The Feminine Mystique. The book was published in 1963 and describes the roles of women in modern societies, particularly as homemakers. The book depicts a depressed suburban housewife who dropped out of college in order to get married and raise a family. In addition, Friedan talks about the lack of positive female role models who worked outside the home and had families. This book was important because it differed from the feminism of the 19th and 20th century. Early feminism focused on how women's suffrage would make better wives and mothers. Contrary to early feminism, Friedan presented a feminist viewpoint in her book, which she called the basic need to grow, man's will to be all that is in him to be. Many historians believe the feminine mystique was inspiration for the second wave of feminism within the United States. After the feminine mystique, Friedan went on to publish 6 books and continued to write for several magazines. Additionally, Betty Friedan was an integral part of activism within the women's movement. Friedan co-founded NOW, the National Organization for Women, in 1966, and in 1970, Friedan organized the Women's Strike. The Women's Strike for Equality occurred on the 50th anniversary of the Women's Suffrage Amendment to the Constitution that occurred in New York and nearly 20,000 people attended. Frieden also founded the National Association for the Repeal of Abortion Laws. After forever changing the course of history, Betty Friedan died on her 85th birthday, February 4th, 2006, in her home in Washington, D.C. To further explore how Betty Friedan was able to inform and persuade so many, I'm going to analyze her commencement speech at Smith College in 1981. Betty Friedan was invited to speak at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. This was special because Betty had graduated from Smith College in 1942. The speech allowed her to reflect on her life, her career, and her growth, and look forward on a world that was much different than the one that she had been born into. Friedan used ethos, pathos, and logos to get her message across in an effective manner. Friedan reminisces on her time at Smith College, and she uses ethos to do so. She reminisces on her accomplishments, which builds credibility, and sense of community with her audience. She says, "For me, the seeds of it were probably planted here, nearly 40 years ago. In my 15th reunion in 1957, appalled at what I later came to call the feminine mystique that was working against the very serious and truth of education that the women were receiving here, what ended for me in the women's movement began." Friedan also uses pathos to evoke emotions that intensify the power of her statements. Friedan uses pathos throughout her speech by using colorful language and descriptive examples, which warrant an emotional response. Friedan uses pathos while speaking about the women's movement in the 60s. She says, "Until it began to seem of war, of women as a class oppressed down by man as a class of oppressors, down with family, down with motherhood, down with marriage, down with everything women had ever done to attract man, down with everything that men, the patriarchs, the male chauvinist pigs had ever done." Here, Friedan uses repetition and the use of emotionally triggering words such as war and chauvinist pigs to arouse the audience. Friedan takes on a personal approach to logos as well throughout her speech. Friedan talks to her audience as if she were having a conversation with a friend, which employs ethos and pathos, but also plays a crucial role in logos. In this, Friedan reasons clearly and plainly, which allows her audience to easily follow and trust her logic. As an example, in this quote, Friedan clarifies her point using logos. She says, "Now I don't want anyone leaving here to say, Betty Friedan is saying we must go back to family, we must retreat to the family. I am not saying that at all. I must say we must move on. We must move on to come to new terms with a dynamic, evolving family that our own equality makes possible, and we must do it in order to live in joy and defend and preserve this equality." In addition, Friedan cleverly and skillfully weaves many rhetorical devices into her speech. Most common are her use of correction of erroneous views, anaphora, and rhetorical questions. Friedan starts off her speech with the use of the rhetorical device, correction of erroneous views. This device works by pointing out where another's observations or opinions may need correction. Friedan uses this method throughout her speech to point out where changes need be made in current society, and it's a call to action for her audience. Friedan begins her speech with the use of the rhetorical device, and it functions as a bold contrast and grabs the attention of the audience right away. Friedan states, "There are those who think you take it all for granted, all the rights, all the marvelous choices, all the options that you enjoy, and that you think they are your due, that the world is your oyster, and that your own exceptional ability has won you those things, that nothing further has to be done, and you don't even realize that they come to you not from your own ability alone, as great as that may be, but because of many years of battle, centuries-long line of women's movement precede you." I don't think that's true. This opening statement is powerful. It is powerful because it uses the correction of erroneous views as contrast, and it is powerful because it uses the word you, which directly involves the audience in the conversation immediately. Anaphora is also rampant throughout Friedan's speech, which helps to amplify her points through repetition and added drama. Friedan's use of anaphora is evident in this quote. She says, "We had to make ourselves visible out of that world. We had to break through the barriers. We had to uncover all the buried history. In addition, Frieden often asked questions in her speech. Some were followed by an answer, a hypophora, and some which do not need an answer, a rhetorical question, which rather serve as a call to action. By starting a thought with a question, Frieden keeps the audience on their toes, attentive, always questioning, and involved. For example, Frieden uses this in her speech when she says, "But what about the next stage? There is nothing guaranteed about it. It has gone so far before and been turned back." Frieden's use of rhetorical questions steadily increases towards the end of her speech, as she cultivates an ultimate call to action from her audience. She says, "So where is the hope then that you can fight for reaction? How are you going to do this? How are you going to save the rights to, say, win equal rights amendment to bring about a political miracle and a political change in the face of the reaction today?" Ultimately, Frieden's oral delivery complements her use of ethos, pathos, and logos, and the rhetorical devices. She artfully manipulates the pace and inflection and tone of her speech. Frieden's overall tone stays low and serious, but utilizes inflections that emphasize key words, usually towards the end of a sentence. Frieden's inflections allow her to keep a steady and varied cadence, which keeps their audience's attention. Overall, Betty Friedan leaves behind a legacy that changed the course of history. She has been credited with the birth of modern feminism through publishing her book, The Feminine Mystique, where she establishes the basic principles and the foundation for the modern feminist movement. Friedan co-founded NOW, the National Organization for Women, which continues to fight to this day for anti-abortion rights, LGBTQ rights, and women's health care, amongst many other important issues. Betty Friedan remains a memorable and impactful figure in history due to her relatable personal journey through motherhood and feminism, in conjunction with her unwavering spirit and sense of humor. In conclusion, Betty Friedan played a crucial role in the history of feminism, and through her exceptional writing and speaking skills, Friedan used ethos, pathos, and logos, and rhetorical devices such as anaphora, rhetorical questions, and correction of erroneous views to effectively get her message across, and ultimately leave a lasting effect. Betty's passion, inflection, and tone will forever be remembered by those who listen to her speak, and her legacy will forever be felt by those who enjoy the women's rights today that she fought for in the past.